Last year, a buddy and I decided to go camping in the Coconino National Forest in Arizona. We both needed to get away from the stress that had been building up and just immerse ourselves in nature for a while. Our plan was to stay for a few days and take it easy. When we got there, we set up camp near the lake so we could try out my new canoe. The first few days were great. We hiked, fished, and paddled, and we finally started to relax. On the third day, we were relaxing at the campsite after a morning hike. Suddenly, we both caught a whiff of something foul, like a garbage can on a hot day. Of course, we both started joking and accusing each other of being the culprit. We laughed it off and thought it was just a temporary smell. But about an hour later, I was fishing along the shore of the lake when I caught the same foul odor again. This time it was much stronger, and I couldn't ignore it. I looked around to see where the smell was coming from, but I couldn't see anything. It was unnaturally strong, though, and it bothered me that I could not identify it. I went back to the campsite, and the smell was still strong. We looked all over the campsite, but we still came up empty-handed. As the day went on, the smell came and went. Later, as we were cooking dinner, we heard what sounded like someone chopping wood a few hundred yards up the hill behind us. It went on for about 10 minutes, with intervals in between, and we couldn't help but feel a little unnerved by it. We wondered who would be chopping wood at that time of night when it was so dark. The thing is, the chopping was coming from a wooded area where there were no campsites. We sort of wanted to investigate, but we decided it probably wasn't the best idea to go into the woods at night. Eventually, the chopping stopped completely, and then there was this really deep silence that seemed to hang in the air. We tried to shake it off and concentrate on cooking dinner, but we couldn't help but feel a little spooked by it. Eventually, we relaxed and were drinking and talking when we suddenly heard a deep, throaty roar. The sound was so loud that it echoed off the hills above us and made us both stop talking immediately. I knew for a fact that there was no wildlife in Arizona that could make that kind of noise. We decided to move our tent and other camping gear right up to the shore of the lake. We figured that whatever was out there would have a harder time sneaking up on us from that direction, but we were feeling pretty nervous by then. We thought about packing up and heading for the truck, which was on the other side of the lake on the road we had come in on. But it had taken us half an hour to walk to our campsite the first day, and we didn't want to risk running into whatever had made that noise. We decided to stay put and keep an eye out. We made sure to keep the fire going, thinking that might scare off whatever it was. Probably about an hour after we'd heard the roar, we heard the wood chopping sound again. But this time it was farther away than the first time. It just didn't make any sense. Then, about 10 minutes later, we heard footsteps coming toward us along the shore. We shined our flashlights in that direction and saw a guy and a girl coming toward us with a bunch of gear. As they got closer, we could see that they looked scared, and we asked if they had heard the strange bellowing sound. They said they had and were too scared to stay. We discussed our options and decided that it would be best if we banded together and hiked back to the forest road where our vehicles were parked. We packed up our gear and headed out, trying to look in every direction as we walked. All the way to the road, that foul smell was in the air again. It was truly overwhelming. As we approached the road, we heard a loud snap of a tree branch, and the girl started running ahead of us. Then, about halfway between us and the girl, this huge thing came out of the trees. It was like a 7-foot-tall monkey covered in dark, shaggy hair. It was huge and really muscular with these huge shoulders and chest and no neck. It was probably only about 50 feet from us. The girl had kept running and we couldn't even see her anymore. The three of us just stood there like idiots, staring at this thing. Then it let out a roaring scream. It was like a shot of adrenaline went through us and we all just started sprinting up the street as fast as we could. We were gasping for breath, but we didn't stop until we reached our vehicles and got the hell out of there. That thing was terrifying. You wouldn't believe how big it was. There is no way I would ever try to camp in that area again. I always wish we had a way to contact that couple so we could talk about what happened, because I'm sure it was a Bigfoot. I'm a cop, and I usually work the night shift with my partner, Jack. Our beat is usually pretty quiet sometimes. Well, get a domestic disturbance or have to bust some kid's party, but in general, our neighborhood doesn't give us much to do. This summer we had another heat wave. People had their air conditioners on full blast, basically from the end of April on, and their power went out, and most of the people in that neighborhood are seniors. We got a lot of calls asking us to take people to the hospital for heat stroke. It was even worse at night because people just couldn't cool off. One of those calls was for this lady, Miss Thurmond. She's been retired for years and she lives with her son, but he was out of town on a business trip. He hadn't heard from her in a couple of days and asked us to check on her. One night, Miss Thurmond didn't answer the door, but I could hear the TV on inside. Jack and I went around the back and jumped the fence. Once we were in her yard, I could see she was in the kitchen. Through the window, it sounded like she was talking to someone in the other room, but I couldn't make out the words. I knocked on the back door and asked her to let us in. She looked surprised to see us standing there, so I explained that her son had sent us. She came out into the yard and told us she needed a place to stay because she didn't want to be in the house. At this point, Jack and I were concerned. I asked her if she had anyone in there with her. She said no. I asked her if she was in danger and she said she wasn't sure. That made us even more confused. She told us that she had been seeing things for the last few weeks. Doors opening and closing by themselves, footsteps in the attic, things like that. When she went to sleep, she felt like someone was standing over her. She said she didn't tell her son because she didn't want him to think she was crazy. We didn't know what to say. If it had been anyone else, I would have thought it was a joke. But Miss Thurmond wasn't like that. And I think, well, she's almost 80 years old. She's not used to being alone. Maybe she just got worked up. Jack and I asked her if we could go in the house and look around. I told her we'd stay with her while she packed an overnight bag. I could tell that she didn't really want to let us in. Maybe she thought it would be dangerous. I don't know. But she took us back to the house. We searched the house, but we didn't find anything unusual. Nobody was in there but us. We looked in all the closets and under the beds, but there was nothing. We told Miss Thurmond that we didn't see anything, but she insisted that someone was in the house with her. We waited in the bedroom while she was packing. Then we heard stomping from upstairs. It sounded like someone was jumping up and down in the attic. She got really scared, so I told Jack to wait with her while I checked it out. The attic was full of junk and old boxes. It was dusty too, like no one had been up there in ages. I waved my flashlight around to see if I could spot a raccoon or something, but no one was up there but me, and there were no windows either, so it wasn't like anything could have blown in from the outside. I was just about to go back downstairs when I heard the stomping again. It sounded like it was right in front of me, and I'm telling you, I saw nothing but thin air. I even went over to where it was coming from and moved some boxes out of the way. Every time I moved forward, the stomping jumped back. It was like whatever it was had to keep moving backwards so we wouldn't be on top of each other. I didn't know what to tell Miss Thurmond or my partner. I had no explanation for what I was hearing, and I had to believe my own eyes, even if it didn't make sense. I knew she wasn't wrong, but I didn't know if confirming Miss Thurmond's fears would do her any good. So I went back downstairs and told Jack to check the attic. If he didn't have the same experience I did, I figured I could write it all off. I got Miss Thurmond out of the house and set her up with her neighbor a few blocks away. When I got back to the house, Jack was standing outside. He said he had something to tell me, and he didn't want me to laugh. So I knew we'd heard the same thing. We didn't really know what to do. We couldn't just do a stakeout and hope that the ghost would show up. We weren't even sure it was a ghost. I called Miss Thurmond's son to let him know his mom was okay, and we got out of there. Anyway, that was that summer. I've been checking in on Miss Thurmond, and she says she's still hearing things. Her son has started hearing and seeing things too. They're debating whether or not to sell the house. I think I would. When I got married about 10 years ago, we decided to move out of the city and try living in a more rural area of New Hampshire. We found a nice new rental house in a quiet neighborhood. It was on a cul-de-sac, which sounded good to us. We'd been living on a street where people were always driving by at 50 miles an hour. This felt like it would be a nice change. At the end of the street there was a huge property with a lot of land behind it. We thought it would be nice to have some wildlife for the neighbors. There were only a few other houses on the street. After we moved in, we met most of the neighbors and they seemed nice enough. But we never saw anyone on the big lot at the end. No one else seemed to know anything about it. Like I said, our rental was a new building, like the other houses, so no one had lived there long. The neighbors said they hadn't really seen any lights on in the old place. They said they occasionally heard screams coming from that direction, which they assumed were bobcats or red foxes, which are common in the area. About 3 months after we moved in, we decided to adopt a dog. He was just under a year old, and when we saw him at the shelter, we couldn't resist. This dog was completely untrained, but we figured since we had a big backyard, we'd at least have plenty of room to work with him. About a week after we adopted him, I came home from work early one evening. My husband was out of town and I went out to check on the dog. I saw that he had dug a hole and escaped under the fence. One of the neighbors came out and said she had seen the dog running toward the old property. She hadn't tried to get him since she couldn't leave her kids. I went up there to look around. The old house was pretty hidden behind some big trees, so I never really got a good look at it. When I got to the back fence, I saw an old "Trespassers will be shot" sign hanging there. I did not think it would be a good idea to go through. The place looked abandoned. The fence was rusty and broken, and the bushes were overgrown and taking over. I looked in one of the windows and saw some old furniture, but no sign of life. I was trying to decide if I should go ahead and break in. When I heard a scream, I dropped down and looked through the fence as best I could. It got really quiet and I didn't see anything. Then I saw this fox come out of the brush and make a mad dash up the side of the hill, and I realized that was where the scream was coming from. Then I saw this huge thing chasing it. I don't know what to call it. It was like a huge, demonic-looking dog. It had a huge mane of fur around its neck, and it was snarling like crazy as it chased the fox. It easily caught up with the fox and put its jaws around the fox's neck, and I saw blood spurting everywhere. I turned around and ran back to my house and locked myself in. Holy freaking God. I was more scared than I'd ever been. I'd never seen anything like it. The weirdest thing is that it was 6 or 7 feet tall, and it was walking on its hind legs. You could almost call the body human-like, except for the size and the hairiness. All I could think about was my poor dog running loose out there. When I calmed down, I went to see which neighbors were home so I could warn them. The ones I talked to thought it must have been a bear I saw. Since that was the only large animal known to be in the area, I assured them it wasn't a bear, but what could I say? I didn't have a name for what I had seen. I felt obligated to let everyone know. I knocked on the door of the last house, and this gnarly, sunburned old guy answered and told me he'd seen this dog. I assumed he meant my dog, but found out he was talking about the giant thing that attacked the fox. I just stared at him and explained again what I had seen, and that it was no dog. He led me into the house and took a notebook off a shelf and turned to a drawing. Holy crap. If that drawing didn't look really similar to what I had seen. The guy said he'd just moved into this house with his daughter, but he used to live over the hill and had seen this creature when he used to hunt. He kept referring to it as a dogman. He said that when he was out hunting and he saw it, he thought it was a coyote. But then it stood up, and he immediately knew it was something much worse. I was just blown away by his story. I told him I thought I should call the police, and he just kind of laughed. I went back outside and looked up at the street, and my dog came out of nowhere. He was whimpering and jumping on me and shaking like crazy. He couldn't stop shaking. I took him home and wrapped him in a blanket and held him for a long time. I never want to see anything like that again. We moved out as soon as our lease was up. Camping is a big part of my life. I'm a Jersey boy not far from Trenton, so most of my life is a congested mess of traffic on the Garden State Parkway and stoplights as far as the eye can see. I love city life, but it does get crowded. I need to recharge my batteries every now and then. Getting out in the woods by myself is the perfect form of therapy. My family used to think it was weird that I went camping by myself, but over the years they have just accepted it as one of my many quirks. I've even taken my younger siblings with me, but it's never stuck. They'd rather stay home and play video games. No one else in my family is into the outdoors. They were born and raised in the city. I was introduced to the outdoors after watching a documentary on Yellowstone. I've had an intense interest in the outdoors ever since. Few people realize that Jersey actually has a lot to offer when it comes to the outdoors. The Pine Barrens is a huge area of wilderness that is rarely explored. Whenever the city gets to me, and I don't have the time or money to plan an elaborate wilderness excursion, I run to the Pine Barrens. I usually go every few weeks and explore a different section each time. I have a very detailed map of the area, and I mark each section where I've camped and hiked. I had planned to set foot on every inch of ground in the park, but now I think I've seen enough. My last trip to the Pines began as usual. I was in the southern part of the Pines called Wharton State Forest. It was a favorite of mine because it is one of the largest contiguous tracts of wilderness in the state of New Jersey. The hike in was beautiful, and my first night I slept soundly with no problems. I made good time getting to my first campsite, so I decided to hike further into the woods and stay another night before heading back the next morning. There are some great wilderness campsites in Wharton that are only accessible by kayak. I rented one from the recreation area and paddled into the less traveled parts of the forest. It's a beautiful area with all kinds of interesting wildlife, but as I approached the riverbank, I felt like something malevolent was watching me from the underbrush. At the time, I thought I was being stupid. An experienced outdoorsman should not be frightened by superstitious feelings. But alarm bells were ringing in my head. The sun was beginning to set, and as I pulled my kayak onto the bank and tied it off, I caught a glimpse of faintly glowing eyes in the darkness. Out of the corners of my eyes, I laughed at myself for being paranoid. I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. It wasn't. It was warm, but I decided to set up my full tent instead of just a tarp. My nerves were on edge and I slept restlessly. I couldn't put my finger on why I was so scared. Then I noticed that the forest was completely silent. No buzzing of bugs or chirping of crickets. I poked my head out of my tent to see if I could hear anything. A hot, dry wind prickled the skin on my face, and the smell of sulfur hit my nose. A pair of faintly glowing eyes peered out at me low in the tree line. A predatory creature was stalking me. I watched in horror as the eyes hovered in the darkness several feet above where a normal person's head would be. The creature stepped out of the trees and I saw its horse-like head slide into the light. I let out an involuntary gasp as the creature's leathery wings snapped open. It opened its mouth and let out a low growl. Steam rose from its throat, as if it had a small fire in its belly. I ran for the kayak. It was a short run, but I crashed through the underbrush and cut my unprotected legs. I almost had a heart attack trying to untie the knot that tied the kayak. I pushed the boat into the water and jumped in. I was about halfway across the river when I heard the beating of huge wings. It sounded like flags flapping in the wind. The creature was circling above my boat like a giant vulture. I could make out the faint glow of its eyes and puffs of smoke hanging in the air. It swooped down on me like a hawk. I jumped out of the kayak and hung off the side. It slammed into the kayak, causing it to bounce against my head and splatter my face. Some water must have splashed on the creature. I heard a sizzle like water on a hot pan and a high-pitched screech from the creature. It flapped its wings and went back to circling me in the sky. I was halfway across the river and decided it would be better to swim the rest of the way. There was very little current, so I easily made it to the opposite bank. I knew the creature did not like water, so I used the rope from the kayak to tie myself to some tree roots at the edge of the water. I finally relaxed and kept only my head out of the water. The creature landed in a tree above me. I couldn't see it, but the smell of sulfur and the hot, dry air lingered for several hours. Finally, I heard the flapping of wings, and whatever it was flew away. I have never been so relieved in my life. I made it back to the more populated area of the park, and some nice hikers gave me a spare set of clothes. I told them that my canoe had overturned on the river. When they asked what had happened, I didn't think anyone would believe what had happened to me. This happened last spring, and I have proof that these creatures are real, but the authorities are trying to cover it up. Here's what happened. Toby and I are both experienced hikers, and we've always wanted to do the old Rag Mountain hike in Shenandoah, Virginia. It's kind of a bucket list thing. We both finally got some time off from work and decided to do it. The thing about this trail is that they don't allow you to camp above 2,800 feet, and the summit is at 3,585 feet. So we decided to backcountry camp in the Berry Hollow area. This was on a Tuesday night, and there were a few cars in the parking lot, but we didn't see a soul in the woods. Kind of surprising because it's a popular hike, but it was late May and school was still in session. We found a nice spot about 1.5 miles from the parking lot and pitched our tent. We didn't stay up late because we wanted to get an early start. I woke up in the middle of the night and lay there for a minute trying to figure out why. I heard it. Something was walking around the campground. I sat up and listened, but I didn't panic. I figured it was a deer nearby, so I lay back down. No growling. Nothing to worry about, right? Toby slept through it. After a minute it went quiet, and I went back to sleep. The next morning I told Toby about it, and we both went to look around the campground. There was an acrid smell in the air, and we thought maybe it was a buck marking his territory. That is, until we saw the tracks in the dirt at the edge of the clearing. They weren't hooves. They were feet. It looked almost like a raccoon's foot, but even bigger than my own foot with claws. Too thin to be a bear, though. There were only 4 toes, and they were spread out like a bird's foot. We looked at it for a minute, but it was kind of smudged, so we couldn't really say for sure what it was. We didn't worry too much about it. We were excited to start hiking. It's a little over a 5-mile hike from where we camped to the overlook. You have to go down the Weekly Hollow Fire Road for 2.5 miles, then turn onto the Ridge Trail. From there, it's just under 3 miles to the overlook. It's really hard, though. And even though we were doing it in the middle of the week, we wanted to start early in case it got crowded. So we walked for a while and everything seemed perfect. Great weather, nice wooded trail. We carried day packs with snacks and water and stopped every now and then to take a break. When we turned onto the Ridge Trail, it got more difficult. There are these areas in the forest where it's not obvious which way to go. We had read in the guidebook to look for blue paint to mark the trail, but we didn't see much of it. Maybe it's just on the rocks above the tree line. I don't know. I was beginning to think we had been turned around. Then I saw a break in the tree line ahead of us, and I knew we were on the right track. I yelled at Toby that we were getting close and to hurry. He yelled back to me to go ahead and he'd catch up. He had to see a man about a horse. I went crazy because it was so like him. But I went on ahead and got to the first ridge above the tree line. It was not the summit, but all of a sudden you could see for miles, and it was amazing. Then I heard Toby scream. Not a scream, but a scream of pain. I ran back as fast as I could, yelling his name, looking back and forth on both sides of the trail, completely panicked. I saw his blue jacket through the brush on the side of the trail and ran to him. He was on the ground bleeding, and his jacket was completely torn. But he was alive, thank God. I thought it must have been a bear. And the hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I called for help. Toby opened his eyes and I could tell he was in pain. The blood wasn't gushing out, but it was slowly trickling in, and I pushed his jacket off to look. He had a huge claw mark going down from his shoulder across his left pectoral. I yelled for help again and fished a windbreaker out of my pack and pressed it to the wound. He said something I couldn't make out at first. Then I realized he was saying picture phone. Then he passed out. I looked around and saw his phone and picked it up and put it in my pocket, my mind going in a million directions. I had to get help right away, and there's no signal up there. I didn't think I could carry him out. I started yelling for help again, like every 5 seconds, and luckily I got someone's attention. A guy came by and I yelled for him to get a ranger. My buddy's hurt. There's a ranger stationed at the intersection of the Weekly Road and the Ridge Trail. I checked and there was blood oozing from the wound, but I didn't think Toby was in danger of bleeding to death. I kept one hand on the jacket, pressing down, and fished his phone out. I had to see the picture. I was shocked when I opened the app and this picture popped up. It looks like a damn dinosaur. This thing was right here in the woods with us. I was totally freaked out, looking around, hoping it wouldn't come back. I didn't have to wait long for help to come. And I just said I didn't know what had attacked him. I needed them to focus on my buddy at that point. And to be honest, I doubted my own eyes. I wanted to take a good look at the picture before I told anyone about it. They took Toby to the hospital and I looked at the picture again. It was unbelievable. But the proof was right there. I hit share on his cell phone and sent a copy to myself. Then I showed the picture to the ranger who was there to take my statement. I told him that Toby had taken it right before he was attacked. I also mentioned that something had been at our campsite last night. Maybe this thing had been following us. I handed him the phone and waited to see his face. When he saw the creature, the guy just shut down. No expression at all. He just said, okay, I have to keep this to show my supervisor. I said, "What is this thing?" And he just said they were going to check on Toby. The biggest concern was infection, but they were taking good care of him. But you know what? The authorities kind of misplaced his phone. Yeah, of course they did. The official report said my buddy was attacked by a bear. It was a cover-up, plain and simple. I bet he already knew about this creature, and now you do too. I have a crazy experience that happened to me recently. I'm an avid explorer, and I love to check out abandoned buildings and stuff like that. I've never been a believer in the paranormal, but now I just don't know. There is more out there than we want to admit. One day I was hiking and I saw the mouth of a cave. It looked awesome and I went in to check it out. It was way too dark to go in without a flashlight, so I figured I'd come back the next day and check it out. I had a flashlight with me. The next day I planned to spend a day exploring the cave. I packed a nice lunch, plenty of water and a flashlight, and headed back to the cave. When I got to where I thought the cave was, there was nothing there. I'm pretty good with directions and do this kind of thing all the time, but I must have gotten the location wrong. I spent hours retracing my steps and trying to find the cave again, but it was nowhere to be found. Finally, it got dark and I started walking back to my car. Even though I didn't find the cave, it was still nice to hike through the woods and soak up the sun all day. I got to the spot where I originally thought the cave was, and it was there again. I swear I visited that exact spot at least 5 times that day. There's a slight chance I was wrong, but I'm telling you, I retraced my steps and mapped out where I had been and where I hadn't been, trying to find that damn cave. It was like it just appeared out of nowhere. I wasn't crazy about the idea of going into the cave for a couple of reasons. First of all, it was getting dark, so if bats chased me out of there or something, it would be harder to find my way out. Second, if I broke my ankle or something, no one would be around to help me. Also, the park was about to close and it's technically illegal to be there that late. I'll be honest though, that last one rarely stopped me. I had spent the whole day looking for the cave and didn't want to go home without having achieved my goal. I turned on my flashlight and went in. It was pretty cool at first. It went much deeper into the earth than I thought, and there were all kinds of stalactites, stalagmites, and a lot of natural beauty that probably no human hand had ever touched. I've been in caves before, but this was really something. I was surprised it wasn't better known and that the park hadn't closed it off and tried to preserve it. It was worth the wait, and spending the whole day trying to find it. You could hear some serious echoes throughout the cave. Every step I took, you could hear echoes all around, and it was cool. I yelled a couple of times to see how long it would take to get back to complete silence. I had a lot of fun exploring the cave. Eventually, I got to the point where I couldn't walk on the rock anymore. It dropped into this huge room. It was much bigger than I could see with my flashlight, but what I could see was amazing, and I could tell by the sound of the echoes that it was huge. I started walking back and I noticed this part of the cave that I hadn't seen before. It was a small opening that I had to kind of crawl through. When I got to the other side, it opened up into a small room with a hole in it. When I shone the light into the hole, I saw huge glowing orange eyes. I freaked out and froze. There was a small gray-skinned creature with arms and legs like a human, but much more lanky and spindly. His head was much larger than his small, skinny body. We just looked at each other for a while, and then it picked up a rock. I was terrified and crawled back through the opening as fast as I could. I got out of the cave as fast as I could. Everybody I've told this story to makes fun of me and says it's Gollum from Lord of the Rings, but it really scared me. In retrospect, caving alone is probably not a good idea. I've read stories of bears living in caves, so I guess I should count myself lucky that I didn't get mauled to death. But I haven't been able to find anything about creatures that fit that description living in caves. And those nasty things with glowing orange eyes are still burned into my memory. And I don't want to think about what it was trying to do to me with that rock. I don't know if I believe in ghosts and stuff now, but I'm not arrogant enough to say outright that they don't exist. Nobody I've explained this story to has been able to give me a reasonable explanation for what I saw. Was it an alien? Was it some kind of demon? Did I discover some kind of new species of humanity? I have no idea, but I'm willing to admit that there are some strange things out there. After what I saw, I can't say for sure that Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster, and aliens don't exist. I just want to know what I saw in that cave.